So I'm going to focus on something maybe a bit controversial today, which is the recent news about the government's decision to deprive people of their British citizenship and the various issues surrounding that. Earlier this year, there was a media frenzy which sparked a massive public discussion when a 19-year-old British girl called Shamima Begum, who left the UK to join ISIS, said she wanted to come back to the UK. People called for her to rot in Syria, to never be allowed back to the UK, and to be stripped of all her rights because of the monstrosities that she had committed. And what made it worse was her apparent failure to see what she had done wrong. And you had journalist after journalist going after her, trying to elicit some kind of remorse, which unfortunately she was unable to demonstrate. If we do a bit of comparison, 2 years earlier there was a case known as G3, where the subject's name was anonymised. And in that case, you had a young British woman of Bangladeshi heritage, very similar circumstances. She had her citizenship revoked, and she challenged that decision in the Special Immigration Appeals Commission, also known as SIAC. And her citizenship was reinstated because it was found that the decision would have made her stateless. Now, about 2 weeks after Shamima's case, there was another story. That was the case of Jack Letts, that also made the headlines. He was also alleged to have joined ISIS, but he was much more articulate in his interview, and he said that he missed pasties and Doctor Who. There was substantially less media coverage about his case. So what does the law actually say? Section 40 of the British Nationality Act says the Secretary of State can deprive someone of their citizenship where it's considered conducive to the public good. So it's quite a wide power. The same section also states the Secretary of State cannot do so where the decision would make somebody stateless. Now, whether a decision to deprive someone of their nationality would make them stateless is quite a complicated matter because it depends on the nationality laws of the country in question. So it's something that definitely needs a detailed consideration of the evidence. I won't comment on Shamima's case specifically, but I'll just speak more generally. In a large number of these cases, where individuals have had their citizenship revoked, it's been done on the premise that they technically wouldn't be left stateless, as they have recourse to another nationality through their parents or through their grandparents, for example. And that's regardless of whether they've ever been to that country, speak the language, or have any ties there. So this means that where the government believes that somebody has access to another nationality, for example, they can apply for it and might be granted it, a decision to deprive them of their citizenship wouldn't make them stateless. So effectively, this means that if you're suspected of a terrorist offence and your parents are nationals of another country, your citizenship is worth less than somebody else's. And that's the government's way of washing its hands of the problem. The first problem with this is that statelessness shouldn't be about options or eligibility. It should be about the here and now. And that's what case law also suggests. Procedurally, there are also difficulties that arise with the way that individuals can challenge these decisions. Because more often than not, they're taken when the individual's outside of the country. And that obviously comes with its own challenges because of the difficulty in accessing a lawyer. And second of all, the main issue in substance in the proceedings, which relates to the government's arguments about national security risks, are actually held in secret. So the individuals actually have no way of knowing what the main allegations are against them. Instead, all they get is the kind of an outline of the issue. And instead, the government appoints security vetted barristers who themselves will only have access to that material. In another case I'll mention very briefly, the entirety of the evidence against the person rested on the fact that he was in a WhatsApp group where messages were sent about ISIS. And a decision was made to deprive him of his citizenship. Now, to do so, rather than charge him with an offence under the Terrorism Act, is quite serious, and it's massively disproportionate. And whilst I do think we have one of the best security services in the world, they do sometimes make mistakes, and they do get it wrong, or they do make decisions which are disproportionate, rather. There was another case in which sorry, my notes have gone. There was another case in which a PhD student, Dr. Rizwan, who was conducting his PhD about terrorism, was reported by his university for printing off a book, which is actually available on Amazon. So what I mean is that although these cases may be anomalies, they do still exist. Now, many people might say that these individuals are security threats, and why should they be allowed to come back to the UK and roam free without any consequences? On the contrary, there should be consequences and they should be punished. But if the government believes its citizens to be dangerous terrorists, then doesn't it have an obligation to prosecute these individuals and if guilty, punish them? The current approach, however, is equivalent to cutting them loose abroad and leaving other countries to deal with the risks that they pose. So why are we so desperately trying to shift the burden when third world countries and war-torn countries have enough on their plates to deal with, without the UK trying to dump its own problems on them? Terrorism isn't a single country's issue, it's a global issue. And I say that the British government does have a responsibility to deal with these people, especially where a young British girl who was born, raised, and ultimately indoctrinated within its own borders. That responsibility should remain regardless of that person's ethnic background. The other thing to note is that the UK does have a de-radicalisation programme where individuals can be required to meet with their mentors weekly or even more than once a week. And whilst prison time does serve as a punishment and a means of protecting others, rehabilitation is important too, because prison doesn't kill an ideology. And this is relevant to my next point, which is that a lot of people often ask, what is it that causes people to go off and join a group like ISIS? What is it that makes them have so much hatred in their hearts? In my line of work, I've met quite a few people who have been accused of committing terrorist offences, or their family members at least. And oftentimes, in my personal experience, I can say they're not masterminds. They're very young, they're very naive, and they don't really have a sense of identity, and often they're sold a false dream by somebody who they were talking to online, who exploited their grievances and distorted their truth. Often these people were never even religious or practicing and had no sense of what that means. And I think when you examine these cases, you find that actually it's not that dissimilar to the way that people are indoctrinated into supporting the far right or to get involved in gangs. Now, I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. This isn't about sympathy, but it's about critically analysing what is and what isn't an effective way of dealing with this issue. It's quite alarming to think that so many young people can be influenced in this kind of way. And there must be more that we can do rather than just shift the burden and say that these people shouldn't be citizens of our country. I think that one of the key pillars of the United Nations global counter-terrorism strategy is to address the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. And it states specifically that whilst none of these conditions can justify terrorism, things like political exclusion, national and religious discrimination, and socio-economic marginalisation are all contributing factors. So in conclusion, I don't think that the deprivation of someone's citizenship is an effective method of counter-terrorism, as it serves to only paint over the cracks without addressing the global issue.